On his return to New Providence on May 21st, Minister of Agriculture, Marine Resources and Local Government, the Honorable V. Alfred Gray, gave a report on his participation in the 7th biannual conference of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum in Kampala, Uganda. Find out the details of Minister Gray's report and plans for local government in the fiscal year 2013-2014. Details after the break.
Would you dump garbage in your own yard? So why put it on another person's property? Garbage dirties our environment. It's ugly, attracts flies, and causes disease. Take care of your own garbage and get rid of it the right way. Let's keep the Bahamas clean, green, and pristine.
This message has been brought to you by the Department of Environmental Health.
Welcome to Your Government in Action. I'm your host, Joy Roger. Veteran Minister the Honorable V. Alfred Gray believes that economic development in rural areas of every country, and in the case of the Bahamas, our family islands, should be the main focus of immediate attention by local government councils, supported by and with the oversight of the central government. Wherever possible, the communication between local government councils and the central governments should be open, frank, and free to allow for proper and adequate exchange of ideas and information that could lead to economic developments in local government districts. Minister Gray sat with Your Government in Action veteran journalist Gina Gibbs recently to discuss his vision for the Ministry of Local Government and what can be expected in the budget year 2013-2014.
Minister, can you please explain what your portfolio entails?
I'll be delighted to do that. I'm responsible for agriculture, marine resources, and local government as general umbrellas of the ministry. But within those general umbrellas, there are some things for which I'm also responsible, one of which is regattas. And so, having said that, I think that's generally what we do.
So, have the recent budget constraints challenged your ministries and your plans for your ministries?
Yes.
In what ways?
Every ministry in the government had been challenged over the last year because of the financial situation in the country. Of course, you know, money is required to do whatever needs to be done in proper governance. And when you have austere times or restricted financial resources, it demands of all of us that we do more with less. And that had been the watchword throughout my ministry, making sure that we get value for money and spend only when it's required, so that whenever we need the little that is available to us, we have it to spend on those things that are absolutely necessary.
So, what we're going to talk about is local government offering services that are normally here in Nassau. They're now starting to offer those services throughout the Family Island at the local government administrator's office, such as, JP services, getting birth certificates, death certificates, marriages to begin with. What other business development plans are going to also be offered at the local government level?
Well, let me just see whether I can put it in perspective. Local government was established in the Family Islands in 1996, and ever since then, elections were held for local government council representatives and town committee persons every 3 years. The purpose of local government, as I see it, is to bring government closer to the people. And having said that, every island has a local government council that is responsible for doing things in their various districts, which were prior to 1996 done by the central government from Nassau. And so I think it is important for me to say that the local government system certainly has made governing a little easier, because they are provided with a budgetary allocation, just like every ministry is, and they do what they can with the resources that the central government provide them to give services and perhaps do upkeep of government buildings in their various communities, which used to be done by the central government. And so they serve a very important role.
Minister, you recently visited Uganda with local family practitioners. Can you tell us a little bit about that trip?
That conference dealt with local government throughout the Commonwealth of Nations. It was sponsored by the Commonwealth Association of Local Government, headquartered in London, and they coordinated the conference with attendance from 126 countries, one of which, of course, was the Bahamas. And they dealt with a number of topics. Some of the things they discussed was the role of women and young people in the development of local government in the various countries. They dealt with the role local government ought to play in the economic development of the countries. They dealt with local government as an entity being enshrined possibly in the constitution of the various countries which has local government. And so generally the conference dealt with a myriad of things, and I had a press conference which I announced all of the things we felt were important, and I hope that going forward we could include some of the suggestions made at the conference into our own local government systems to see whether it improves what we now have.
Now, the Bahamas being an archipelago nation, would local government issues be a bit more unique in that compared to other countries in the Commonwealth? Can you explain?
Yeah, I think because of the archipelagic nature of the Bahamas, spread out as we are, local government, in my view, is even more important, because if you have a one landmass like Jamaica or Barbados, it's easier to govern because you can almost drive from point A to point B on a daily basis and see what the needs are and do what is required to meet those needs. In the Bahamas, if you are in Abaco, you really don't know what's going on in Crooked Island. And so with the advent of local government, it was easier for the central government to be aware of things which were important to the people through the local government system, because they're on the ground and anything happen overnight, they know it the next morning. For a government which did not have this local government component, governing, in my view, was a little more difficult, because you probably will know of a need weeks after the need arises. Now you can know it the next day because of the people who were elected to look after the affairs of the people who elected them. It's easier, in my view, to govern our country through the medium of local government, overseen by the central government.
Do you see local government playing a bigger role in business development in the Family Islands?
I hope local government would. Generally, though, the investor, be he domestic or foreign, always approaches the central government for approval to invest in the Bahamas. There is very little economic activity in some of the islands. For example, the islands that I represent, Acklands, Crooked Island, Meg Warner, and Nagua and Long Key, they are perhaps the least developed islands in the chain of islands. And if I were to use that constituency as an example, if there is going to be any economic development, I think it has to be spurred by perhaps joint ventures between local and foreign investors, or foreign investors or local investors. But there are very few people who live on those islands who would be able to start an investment of any consequence. There are a few bonefish lodges and things like that, which I suppose spring up from time to time all over the Bahamas. But investment which will make a difference to the economic life of the people in those islands, in my view, would be better spurred by local investors. But I believe there is also the requirement to seek out foreign investment of a major kind, which will bring employment in multiple numbers to those islands. Otherwise, it's going to be a long time before they get on their economic feet.
Hear more from Minister Gray on the programs going forward for local government when we return.
Did you know that there's a right way and a wrong way to put out your trash for collection? All trash must be bagged, sealed, and properly contained. All garbage cans must be covered. Garbage should not be piled around the bin. Only standard food waste products should be placed out for weekly collection. Do not leave out items such as appliances, furniture, and auto parts. Bulk items can be picked up by DEHS. Let's keep the Bahamas clean, green, and pristine.
Welcome back. We now rejoin the conversation with the Minister of Agriculture, Marine Resources and Local Government, the Honorable V. Alfred Gray.
Minister, I wanted to ask you about the Registrar General offering services through local government in the Family Islands, offering JP services to provide births, deaths, marriage certificates, and whatnot. Can you tell us a little bit about those plans to expand to the other Family Islands?
I'll be happy to. As you know, the government's main objective is usually to bring services to the people it represents. And the Registrar General Department has begun its trek throughout the Bahamas to provide some of the services which were only available in New Providence. One of the things that it had begun to do starting in Abaco of recent vintage was the fact that you can now get your birth certificate from the administrator's offices in some of the islands. I'm sure it will go to all of the islands. You can get copies of documents, land papers. And you know that's important, Gina, because if you needed a birth certificate living in Crooked Island, you would have had to take a plane, and that's $250. And then you have to spend 3 days in Nassau. At a hotel, if you didn't have families, that's another $700. And of course, transportation. When you added all of the costs or possible costs, you would have spent about $1,000 just to get a birth certificate. And this birth certificate, it costs $10. You can see almost immediately the advantage of having these things produced in the islands where the people live, because you can walk almost to the administrator's office and get a birth certificate which costs $10, and you save $990 just by a visit to the administrator's office. And because it's not available in every island yet, I think the announcements will be made as they do each island, but certainly it's available in some, and it began in Abaco. And I'm delighted to see how much pleasure has been brought to the people who now are able to access the service where they live.
Now, there's something else I wanted to ask about. In the Family Islands, they have what's called commonage land.
Yes.
How is local government dealing with the issues of ownership and proving ownership and for economic development with commonage land?
Well, I'm the minister responsible for commonage land as well in the Family Islands. And I think local government has very little to do with commonage land. Every island has a commonage committee set up by law, headed by the commissioner or the administrator. The administrator keeps a register of all the descendants and persons who are entitled to be granted a piece of land out of the commonage assets. And every applicant for land in that commonage area must be a descendant or resident of the commonage area. So, for example, if you showed up in Eleuthera, Rock Sound, where there is commonage property, if you have no connection with Rock Sound by virtue of birth or family ties, you're not entitled to any land out of the commonage land area. And so it is a way of keeping the land in a generational way. And it goes, you can't sell it, but it's just as good as any other title, because once you can show by virtue of registration that you are a member of the commonage inheritors, you are entitled to a piece of that rock. And the banks, I'm told, have begun to take commonage land as equitable title for small loans. And I think the government is now having a committee look at the whole question of commonage land to see how best legal title could be given to individuals who would like to develop more than just a small house for him or her to live in and to do business, because the banks would not generally take commonage land to do massive investments, because if you default, the title to the land is not clear enough for a bank to sell it, because the whole purpose of commonage land was never to be sold, but to go from generation to generation.
Minister, can you explain to us the difference between Crown land and commonage land?
I'll be delighted to try. Commonage land generated from plantation owners granting acreages of land to slaves. And for example, there are commonages in Eleuthera, Exuma, Cat Island, and generally throughout the Bahamas where slave plantations were. And it was given to the slaves in order to develop, to take care of themselves by the landholders. And the general rule is that the land is not to be sold. Crown land, on the other hand, is land owned by the government, because most, if not all, lands in the Bahamas, other than lands which were sold or purchased by private owners, are owned by the government. That's Crown land, and that falls under the office of the Prime Minister. But commonage land fall within my portfolio as minister responsible for the Family Islands.
Now, is commonage land leased like Crown land, or?
Commonage land is not leased, it's granted. By that, the commonage committee grants an acre of land to a particular person for a particular purpose. And the land is always known not to be sold as a matter of law. You can use it, you can develop it, but you cannot sell it. And that's why the government is seeking to make it possible for those who develop commonage land to get a piece of paper or title to it, so they can use it as collateral at the bank for development. And then that way, I believe you will see much more development going on in those islands that have commonage land for which title is not readily available for banks usage. On the other hand, Crown land is given to applicants by the Office of the Prime Minister, and it can be a grant, it can be a lease with the condition once you develop it, a grant will be given to you. A grant is basically a document which gives you fee simple title or legal title to the land that the government grants to you.
From a local government perspective, what are your plans for regattas and promoting domestic tourism in the Family Islands among Bahamians?
Well, that's a big question, but let me just see whether I can assist you with some answers. Firstly, regattas are generally put on by regatta committees, and the regattas are usually sponsored by private enterprises, supported by a government grant to the major regattas. Having said that, local government certainly would assist in the putting over of these regattas in their islands, but they're not responsible for them. For example, Andros. Andros has about 4 regattas. Almost every area of Andros would have a regatta during the year, but each area would have a regatta committee that's responsible for organizing the regatta and executing its success. The government's role is generally to support what the private enterprises do, and we make contributions to each regatta to the extent that we are able. For example, Georgetown Regatta, the government gave some $50,000 to assist with the expense of having that regatta, and it was a major success. But local government as an entity have very little responsibility for regattas. Let me also say that regattas are more than a sport. In my view, regattas generate economic activities, sometimes the only economic activity for some islands for the whole year. And so when you have thousands of people gathering in one place, some of them don't even understand the races. And so they go basically for the socio-economic activities which generally had during regattas. Mingle and mix, go back to see families and friends. And when that happens, you have thousands of people gathering in one place, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for food, accommodation, transportation, etc. So it brings economic life to the islands where regattas are held. And so for the sports side of it, very few people will probably stand on the beach and watch the boat sail, because sometimes they don't even understand what's going on, but the fun and the music and the food and just mingle and mixing brings a whole different life to the island where regattas are held. And I'm always delighted to be among those people just to see how they interact at regatta times. And so the government has made it almost a requirement that it supports every regatta economically, financially, so that some support is given to committees which might not be able to put together the required finances to put over a successful regatta. And that's why the government thought it is important to even budget for regattas in the Family Islands in every budget year.
Now, I understand that you also are responsible for the fish fry for Potter's Key Dock, and those also generate economic activity. And with regattas and having fish fries throughout all the different archipelagos. Is that part of the economic development as well?
I think it must be considered such that even though it's not organized as an economic event, it's more a social event. But I can tell you, because of the activities on land that happens during regatta time, most people who live on these islands will tell you they make their money for all year during regatta time, which only lasts 3 or 4 days. And when regatta is finished, they start preparing for the next one. All the hotels are full, all of the cars are rented, and so people are generally expectant when it comes to the regatta in their area.
I was also wondering, are there any marketing plans for local businesses like restaurants and hotels throughout the Family Islands to show people where they can go, where they can stay, give them kind of an itinerary? Because I think that that's probably, that probably will help with developing domestic tourism, is if people know where they can go.
Well, I know the tourist ministry, or the Ministry of Tourism, has a plan by which they market the entirety of the Bahamas. Of course, they concentrate their marketing dollar on where it will perhaps produce the greatest results, and that's understandable. But the Ministry of Tourism does do some marketing of all the islands of the Bahamas in one way or the other. And then the Family Island Promotion Board also does some promotion of the Family Islands. I think the biggest setback seemed to be that when there is a new development, very seldom is that brought to the attention of the marketing people, so that if a new lodge is built in Crooked Island, it is the responsibility of the developer to bring his development to the Ministry of Tourism's attention so that it could be included in the marketing mix, so that it doesn't stand out there by itself, but it's part of the general marketing plan for the Bahamas tourism thrust.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add about, I guess, regattas, developing domestic tourism, any kind of partnership with the Family Island Tourism Board or other ministries in the
Well, I can tell you, Gina, I am hoping that those Bahamians who have money, and instead of hoarding it in the bank, I think it's important for me to encourage them to go island hopping, find an island that you really like, and invest in it. Because, if we leave our country only to foreigners to develop, I think that's the wrong approach. There are some Bahamians who are moneyed, who can do some things, and it is my hope that more Bahamians would find the Bahamas attractive enough to put their monies in the ground, develop small hotels, whatever touristic kind of development might be suited for the islands. Ecotourism is catching on in most of these islands, and so I think once you go once and see what possibilities exist, I think that might cause your interest to spur, and developments will follow, in my view.
Stay tuned for upcoming coverage of the Ministry of Local Government as we bring coverage of the minister's debate contribution in upcoming weeks. That is all for this week. Join us in the next edition of Your Government in Action as we continue to follow what this administration is doing to develop a more prosperous Bahamas.